There's a much bigger show, a much bigger development going on. And it goes by the name of the neoliberal consensus. These are the globalists. And it's not left versus right. It's globalist versus nationalist. That's a much better way to understand what's going on in the world. And if you're an investor, to understand where you should place your bets. See, Trump never drained the swamp because he couldn't find the swamp. He didn't understand what the swamp was. If Biden were not the president, some family member would have gone to court to appoint a guardian. He can't write a check or sign a contract, let alone an executive order. If you pull the plug now, it will be chaos.
Hi everyone, Daniela Cambone here from ITM Trading. I hope everyone's enjoying our summer videos. We're about to actually officially kick off our summer series with so many exclusive interviews. In fact, I'm about to head off to the Rick Rule show down in Boca Raton, Florida, where I'm going to have some incredible interviews. But before I start packing my bags, I just wanted to take a second here to remind you and urge you, if you have not, to book a free strategy session with one of my colleagues over at ITM Trading. One of the reasons I came to ITM is because I'm fully aligned with their philosophy that education comes first. So if you are new to precious metals, or maybe you already own precious metals as a wealth preservation but would like more information, then I urge you to book a Calendly appointment. It's free. It's great, it's educational, informative, and like I always say, it's actually even a lot of fun. You can find the link below in the video. So like I said, do that, and then let me know how it went. You could shoot me a comment. Check out today's video. Hi, Daniela Cambone here for the Daniela Cambone Show on ITM Trading. Joining me back today, best-selling author Jim Rickards. You know him from Currency Wars, Sold Out, and his latest Money GPT. Jim, always good to be with you. Welcome back.
Thank you, Danielle. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm happy I caught you before we're both packing our bags,
right,
heading to Rick Rule's show next week in Boca.
Yeah, that's
Can't
one
wait
of the
to see you there.
Great conferences every year. Yep, absolutely.
Yep. But look, no shortage of news. What do you think I'm going to start with, Jim? Well, obviously we're going to talk about the flop of that debate, but I wanted to bring up billionaire investor Ray Dalio, founder of hedge fund firm Bridgewater's warning post-debate, Jim. He says if Biden drops out of the presidential race after last week's debate performance, a clash between extremists on the right and left may be in store in America. He laid out the clash in what he acknowledged were stark terms, saying, quote, while it is now clear that the red team, Republican side, will consist of players from the hard right, we will soon find out if the blue team, the Democrats, will be from the soft left or the hard left. Your take on Dalio's comments here before we get your perception of the debate.
Yeah, there is a big split, even something you might describe as at least a political version of a civil war inside the Democratic Party. We see it almost every day, and I think Ray correctly described. There's no center in the Democratic Party; that's long gone. Those people, I know some very moderate, loyal Democrats, people like Doug Sosnick, Doug Schoen, and others. They're just very reasonable, smart people, but they've been run out of the party or working around the edges, even though they're both extremely smart and talented. And it's pretty much the far left, the AOCs, the progressives, Hakeem Jeffries, and others, and let's call it the everyday left, who are still pretty radical, but maybe slightly more practical. So he's right about that. But it's getting worse than that, and the French Revolution is always a classic example. So the revolutionaries overthrew the King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, got rid of them, etc. But then once they set up the guillotine and started chopping people's heads off, they started chopping each other's heads off. In other words, the Jacobins were more radical than the original revolutionaries, and Robespierre, killed thousands of people on the guillotine, and then they chopped his head off. In other words, they just keep going until something intervenes. And in that case, it was Napoleon. But I thought it was interesting the other day, just a couple of days ago, it was what they call Pride Month or whatever. And they had a pride parade in New York City last Sunday, and so that's pretty radical, pretty left wing. Not everybody. I'm not painting with a broad brush, but it's just the case. But the parade was attacked and disrupted by the Hamas
Right.
supporters, by the terrorist supporters. So here you had like who's more extreme left, the Pride Brigade at their extreme versus the Hamas terrorist supporters. But none of them were on the right, let's put it that way. They were attacking each other. That is the history of a lot of revolutionary movements. I mean, it happened with the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, and during the Russian Revolution. So, but I guess where I would disagree with Ray, that's happening anyway. But to suggest that, gee, you need Biden to hold it all together, and if you get rid of Biden, you're going to open the door to this conflict. I would say the conflict is already there. Biden's not holding anything together. Biden can't hold himself together. So to anchor anything on Biden, I mean, I would say the biggest surprise to me post debate. So the debate was a week ago Thursday, and Biden failed miserably, and of course ever since then we've been reading all this commentary. Oh, Biden was not coherent. He lost his train of thought. He was babbling. He was saying things that made no sense. And, the Democrats are shocked. We can't believe it. How did this happen? I'm like, are you kidding me? This has been obvious for 4 years. And I said years ago that dementia, I'm not a doctor, just to be clear, but, it doesn't mean we can't know a little bit about it. And some of us have firsthand experiences, by the way. Dementia is a progressive disease. It only gets worse. It doesn't get better, and there is no cure. So if you have it at all over the course of time, it will get worse. It doesn't have to be full-blown Alzheimer's where you don't even recognize your family members, but the idea that you are not rooted in reality, you make up stories, et cetera, your logic isn't really there. That's what happens. And that was apparent 4 years ago. It was clear in the 2020 basement strategy. Why do you think they kept Joe Biden in the basement? So to get to today, to 2024, and say, gee, I'm shocked the guy's so far gone. Like, where have you been for the last 4 years? Having said that, the Democrats fell victim to their own when you lie and produce propaganda. So this whole Biden thing's been a big cover up. He's been going for a while. The whole Scranton Joe, Six Pack Joe, Amtrak Joe. It was always a facade. I mean, he's kind of a mean spirited, nasty, not very bright, kind of white collar criminal or worse from Delaware. I mean, that's who he is. But he's been losing his mind. But the Democrats bought their own propaganda. They were putting out so much propaganda through mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN, other channels, squashing the internet, using Facebook as a form of censorship, Twitter before Elon Musk bought it, et cetera. They actually drank their own Kool-Aid and sort of convinced themselves that Biden was okay when he's never been okay. I mean, if you want to read the most revealing comments, get some of these off the record comments from foreign leaders, foreign heads of state at the G7 summit, which was in mid-June, at the Normandy, the D-Day commemoration, yes, which was in early June. They're shocked and appalled at what they say. So it's been there all along, but all of a sudden the Democrats got a wake-up call. Oh, gee, the guy's really not all there. So but the point of that is the idea that he's the center of anything, the idea that he's holding it together is nonsense. It's a facade. It's already fallen apart. One last thing, Danielle. I use a lot of different indicators and sources in my own analysis, in my own models. And one of the most reliable ones I use is that hedge fund mavens are the worst political analysts you can find. Find out what they're doing. I'm serious. Find out what they're doing and do the opposite. So, I've met Ray Dalio in Greenwich. Nice guy, does a lot of good charitable work. But Ray Dalio, Paul Singer, Bill Ackman. The list. Take any one of them. Find out what they're supporting, and that's pretty much a loser. And then, go. So as a contrary indicator, it's great. These guys were all in on Nikki Haley. I mean, and many other examples. But their hedge fund mavens are one of the best contrary indicators. Ken Griffin, I forgot to mention him. Hedge fund mavens are one of the best contrary indicators of what's actually going on that you can find.
Well, just one more point on Dalio, and then I want to just get back to some comments surrounding Biden. Um, he, in the same opinion piece, I mean, he kind of stated the obvious, saying that markets prefer capitalists. So at this time, investors from all over the world are asking themselves, one, where can they be most confident that these cash flows will be best? And two, where are these capital values most strongly held and protected? I want to get Jim Rickards' take on that, even though, again, I think it's stating the obvious that the markets obviously prefer capitalists. But where do you think most value will be held now?
Well, I think Dalio's a little bit, maybe more than a little bit behind the zeitgeist. So when you set up, and one of the greatest dangers in any analytical method or just conversation, whatever, is what I call the false dichotomy. You set up like A versus B, black versus white, up versus down frame. And then you're actually missing all the things that don't fit into those categories. So when Ray Dalio says he prefers capitalism, and that investors around the world are asking themselves who's kind of favorable to capitalism, he's setting up a dichotomy between capitalism and something else, probably socialism, communism, etc. But I would say that's having a two-factor frame is completely inadequate for the moment we're in. So what's happening, and I'm going to talk about this at the Rule conference. There's a much bigger show, a much bigger development going on, and it goes by the name of the neoliberal consensus. But the neoliberal consensus is not, it's not Ronald Reagan, it's not post World War II. This goes back to the beginning of Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, or kind of the avatars, the biggest brains in that movement. But there are many, many others. But what does that neoliberal consensus, how does it play out? These are the globalists, and it's not left versus right. It's globalist versus nationalist. That's a much better way to understand what's going on in the world. And if you're an investor, to understand where you should place your bets. So what was the nirvana of the globalists? It was the period from 1870 to 1914. We really did have a gold standard. It wasn't a Bretton Woods gold standard. It was just countries said, hey, my currency is worth a certain amount in gold. And I'll buy the gold at that price, or if you want to buy my gold, that's fine. But commerce worldwide was based on a lot of countries, certainly starting with the British Empire, but including the United States, although the U.S. came along later. But Peru, Spain, India, which was a colony at the time, but all around the world, countries pegged their currencies to gold, and through a simple transitive law, they were pegged to each other. So fixed exchange rates. But we had some version of free trade, free capital flows. And free free exchange of currencies. So that was the globalist nirvana. It all blew up in World War One. As soon as World War One came along, the other thing they wanted was free movement of labor, which means open borders. So the globalists, and I would put Hayek and Mises in this category, don't really care about democracy. They don't particularly care about human rights. What they do care about is free capital, free trade, and free movement of labor. And they're obsessed with price discovery because they view that world has the best price discovery. Price discovery is a form of information, and you can allocate capital rationally and make investment decisions. I get all that, but the problem is you ignore things like human organ transplants, human organ harvesting without anesthetic of political prisoners in China. That's somehow doesn't fit in. The globalists are willing to overlook that because they have these other ideals. So beginning after World War One, with the League of Nations, and Americans don't really learn the League of Nations because the U.S. didn't join. Okay, but we were kind of like ancillary members. But the League of Nations really pushed this to a great extent. It blew up again during the Great Depression and World War II. So now coming out of World War II, what did we have? We had Bretton Woods, so we're kind of back to a gold standard, back to kind of open capital flows, which took a while to develop, and above all, free trade in the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which turned into the World Trade Organization, and China was admitted in the year 2000. So this was the globalist agenda. They didn't care that China was communist. They didn't care about things like that. Now, there's now a massive reaction to that. What's going on with Marine Le Pen in France, the European
Right.
Parliament elections? Here comes Nigel Farage with his own party in the UK. They're going to throw out Rishi Sunak. They're going to throw out Macron. They're going to throw out Biden. Putin is in a very solid position. What do Viktor Orban in Hungary? What do they all have in common? They're nationalists. They're not globalists. So there are still going to be winners and losers. But if Dalio is thinking of capitalist versus socialist, I would say wrong frame, wrong century. You have to think today of nationalists versus globalists, or don't think of capitalist versus socialist. Think of nationalist versus globalist. That's the right way to think about where the opportunities lie, and the nationalists are winning.
Do you think the Republican Party is aware of that?
The Republican Party is the nationalist party. The globalists in the Republican Party, the rhinos, are being run off the road one by one. It takes time. Mitch McConnell stepping aside at the end of this year. Nikki Haley is toast. The Bushes are, played an important role, but they're yesterday's news. One by one, the globalists are being run out of the Republican Party, and they're being replaced by nationalists. So that's very far along. It's going to be ingrained after the election. Trump will win, and look. I voted for Trump in 2016. I voted for him in 2020. I actually voted for him this year in the New Hampshire primary, so I have a pretty good track record of voting for Trump. But I am a fierce critic of Trump because of the way he bungled the transition in 2016. That was like a once in a century opportunity. See, Trump never drained the swamp because he couldn't find the swamp. He didn't understand what the swamp was. The swamp is the deep state, but there's actually a book. It's called the Plum Book. It's a list of every federal job where the president has power of appointment. Some require Senate confirmation, but many do not. Trump said, well, I'm not going to worry about appointments because if I don't like you, you're fired. That may work in New York real estate. It does not work in Washington, D.C. He hired a bunch of, people. I think of Christopher Wray, head of the FBI, as a neo-fascist. I think I'm right about that. Donald Trump appointed Christopher Wray. So if you're Donald Trump, don't whine to me about, the FBI is all over you. Well, you appointed the director. You picked Christopher Wray. So why don't you get some better advice? Why don't you get some better appointees? That's the bad news. The good news is they are. I think Trump has learned his lesson. 78-year-old guy doesn't change his spots very easily, but I think he learned that was a wasted opportunity. He knows this will be his last term. They've got two things going on: Heritage Foundation, Project 2025. It's called Mandate for Leadership 2025. Peter Navarro is coming out with a book where he kind of lays out this. There's the Plum Book itself. There are resources out there, but if you want to see what Trump's going to do in a second term, check those resources, and you can see this is going to be a radical change. And it's going to, so to short answer your question, Daniela, is that the Republican Party is the Nationalist Party, and the globalists are being run out of the room.
Interesting, Jim. And he's nowhere in your league of being a political analyst, but I thought Dave Portnoy, and again, I bring this up because it amassed over 3 million views. I thought he had an interesting take. And again, baseless. This is just his theory, but he's a social media entrepreneur, superstar. And he said that Biden was just set up by the Dems. They knew he would fail. How couldn't, to your point, how couldn't they have seen his deterioration this past 4 or 5 years? And that the real plan is just to usher in a Gavin Newsom, which he says would just be an absolute catastrophe for the country. So just and before we move on from politics, just your two takes on, does Biden get replaced now? And so if you think he does, who do you think fills his shoes?
Yeah. Well, on the first question, I think the answer is no.
Okay.
Now, would it be a good idea to replace Biden? Yes. My concern about Biden is not like who wins or loses the election November 5th. That's a big deal, and we talked about it. My concern is that we don't get into the annihilation of the human race between now and then. As you know, I'm pretty pretty bold when it comes to promoting my own books, but I've been suggesting people read a book by Annie Jacobson called Nuclear War. Brand new bestseller, easy to find. Read that book. You won't sleep, but you'll learn a lot about just how destructive and how dangerous nuclear war is. We seem to have forgotten all those lessons. We knew them in the 50s and 60s and even in the 1970s, but after the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, all that knowledge was kind of lost. The nuclear weapons are still there. Read the book. You'll see how, and she does a minute by minute scenario. It's a nonfiction book, but she does this scenario of from launch to devastation of how a nuclear war would actually play out. I've been to a lot of the locations she mentioned. I've been to Strategic Command in Omaha, Nebraska. I've been to some of the national laboratories. And I've worked in the intelligence community. I have not touched nearly as many bases as she has, but my point is I've touched enough of them to know that she's got this right. She did her homework. She talked to a lot of people, including some 80 and almost 90-year-olds who, some of whom have died since she interviewed them, who were very active at Los Alamos and the 1950s nuclear tests, who had classified information that they never gave up. And it's almost like, hey, I'm 89, I'm dying soon, I got to get this off my chest. They told her stuff that's been classified for 60 or 70 years. And she put it in the book because she's a writer. She's allowed to do that. And it rings true, but you'll really be kind of immersed in this. But here's the bottom line, Danielle. When you sort through everything, a launch, was it launched? Do we have it on the radar? Is it headed our way? Is it an intercontinental ballistic missile? Does it have a nuclear warhead? Who launched it? Shoot the anti-missiles, which don't work, by the way, but they'll shoot. By the time you get through all of that, and you're the president, you have to decide, do I launch my missiles now? Because if you don't, maybe your missiles will get wiped out and you lose. Do I launch my missiles? That decision-making window is about 6 minutes. 6 minutes, 6 minutes to decide the future of the human race. Now, take what I just said, which, again, she documents it very well, and it absolutely rings true, and put Joe Biden in that room. That's like, her book is scary enough, but now you should
that
just
brings up the real, that brings
can't.
up a whole other question. I know we don't have time to cover this. Does he really make that call? Is it really Biden?
He can't. He can't. This whole idea that, I mean, what's the Democratic spin on the debate performance? Oh, he had a bad night. Obama started that
Right.
like that. Now, oh, he had a bad night. I've had bad nights or whatever. Okay. Yeah, we have bad days, good days. Sometimes we are a little more on top of our game than others, but that's not what we saw. We didn't see a bad night. We saw a guy who doesn't know where he is, who doesn't know who he is. And now that it's coming out for the big fundraisers. They had a big fundraiser in the Hamptons the other day, raised, I don't know, $20 million or something like that. But the people in attendance, and this is the Ray Dalio crowd, these are the hedge fund billionaires and some others, they're the ones who are going to these fundraisers. They were appalled. They said that he came in, he read from a teleprompter. I've been to a lot of fundraisers. You don't read from a teleprompter. You shake hands, you work the room, you go around, you say hi to everybody, you pose for pictures, whatever. That's what you do. And yeah, make some prepared remarks, but you don't read from a teleprompter and walk out of the room. And
Right.
that's what they saw.
But why are they clinging on to Biden then? Why do the Dems?
Because
Why?
they waited too long. The time to do everything. By the way, I wrote about this last year, and I said, here's where this is going. They were not honest with themselves. As I say, they drank their own Kool-Aid. I had to use cliches, but that's a good one. They bought into their own spin and thought that he was okay with the occasional gaffe. Remember the word gaffe? These aren't gaffes. This is a guy who doesn't know who he is. But they bought into that, and they waited and waited and waited and waited, and thought they could somehow get through this with version 2 of the basement strategy. By the way, who's thinking about national security? Who's thinking about the United States of America? All they're thinking about is keeping power, even if you need an empty husk who should be in a nursing home or assisted living facility. And I said the other day, if Biden were not the president, some family member would have gone to court to appoint a guardian. He can't write a check or sign a contract, let alone an executive order. So they waited too long. The problem now is if you pull the plug now,
Yeah.
it will be
Right.
chaos. I mean, Dalio's right
Someone
about
had
that.
a good point. I don't remember who said it, but I remember reading it thinking, oh, that makes a lot of sense, that world leaders are watched the debate, basically walked away thinking we
Oh
could do
yeah,
anything with America from debate night
correct,
to January 2025.
correct. Well, first of all, that's right, and they probably all set their countdown clocks. Now, I expect Trump to win. We'll have more time. Maybe hopefully we'll do another interview before the election. But and I understand polls can change. I get all that, but right now Trump is on track not just to win, but maybe an electoral college landslide, meaning like because that's how we elect presidents. It's not the
Right.
popular vote. This could be 330 to like whatever's left for Biden, 200, low 200s or something. But this could be an electoral college landslide. It's not just we all memorized the 7 battleground states, and Trump was ahead in 7 out of 7. The poll, like Real Clear Politics and others, they've taken some of those states out of the battleground category because Trump's so far ahead. They're not. That's not a battleground state. North Carolina, you're talking 7-8 point leads in some of these states. They're not battlegrounds anymore. Trump's got them. But what they're doing is they're adding new states to the battleground list that no one expected Trump to win. Virginia, Minnesota. They're even talking about New Jersey, New Mexico. So this could be a wipeout. So let's say that plays out, which I expect, and Trump is in. Okay, remember Trump's the guy who went to the demilitarized zone in Korea and met with Kim Jong Un. Doesn't mean Kim Jong Un's a nice guy. He's a monster, but Trump at least took him seriously enough to go see him, whereas Biden can't go to our friends like France and Germany and hold his head up. He can't talk.
Want to move on now, Jim? Let's talk a topic that you and I have spoken about at length here: de-dollarization. I saw your comments, especially when there were a lot of mistaken articles, regarding Saudi Arabia's exit from the petrodollar, and we'll talk that. But I thought Trump's recent comments were interesting, and this is what I want to bring up to you. He was speaking at a Bitcoin conference during this, where he said the US is the big piggy bank, but our piggy bank is going to get smaller and smaller all the time because we're losing power. We're losing a lot of countries on the dollar. I mean, they're going like flies. And if we ever lose that, that's the equivalent of losing a war. That would be unbelievable. The equivalent of losing a war, basically, in reference to if the US were to lose its dollar, its reserve status, if the US dollar were to lose its reserve status.
Right. Right.
Thoughts on the fact that at least he's thinking about it?
Well, that's right. And when he says it's the equivalent of losing a war, I agree with that, but I would go a step further and say it is a war. We're in a war. We are in a financial war right now. I know there's a kinetic war in Ukraine, kinetic war in Gaza, confrontations bordering on, violence in the South China Sea. The Houthis have effectively closed the Suez Canal. So we have enough shooting wars going on, thanks to Biden and our failed foreign policy. But this is a financial war now, and I've talked to the Treasury and the Pentagon and the Fed and the intelligence community about 10, 15 years ago. We had these discussions, although not that anyone took it seriously when they should have. But a lot of what you're hearing has come out of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that was held in St. Petersburg at the beginning of June. And Putin was there. Sergei Lavrov was there a couple of years ago. Like nobody showed up because Russia bad kind of thing. But now people realize that America is really the one prolonging the war in Ukraine, and Russia is doing what they have to do to kind of protect their national security. They don't want to be backed into a corner. But now it's like okay to go there, and there were delegates and delegations, attendees, experts, et cetera, from over 100 countries who were there. And that's where a lot of the update on the BRICS currency was coming from. Now, The next BRICS summit, we talked last summer, we were talking, I was giving presentations on the BRICS summit meeting in South Africa last August. There's a rotating presidency. You host the BRICS summit on a rotating basis.
Yep.
This year, it's Russia. And they're having this summit in October in Kazan in the Russian Federation. And what they're going to do is admit a lot more new members. We have the list of applicants. I don't know exactly which countries are going to join, but Turkey would be high on the list, and some Malaysia, and some other, maybe Saudi Arabia, and some other important countries. But the point is, this is the key to making the BRICS currency, whatever they call it, the unit or whatever, a very successful trading currency, and basically for trading, settling, balance of payments, etc., is to expand the membership in the group. So if you have two countries, Russia, let's just take Russia and India, for example, and Russia sells oil to India, which they're doing, and India pays in rupees, Indian rupees. Okay, that works. You don't need to go through SWIFT for that. You can use Russian bank accounts in Mumbai. But what's Russia going to do with the rupees? Well, they can buy a certain amount of chicken curry or whatever. But there's a limit on what you can do with the currency. So in a bilateral relationship where you agree to accept each other's currencies, that can work. It's not that difficult to do. But the problem is, what do you do with the currencies? Who really wants Russian rubles? Honestly, who wants Chinese yuan? Who wants Indian rupees? Now, but if you expand the membership, it's no longer 2 countries or 4 countries, but it's 20 countries. And all of a sudden, you're Russia and you sell oil to India, but India pays you in the BRICS currency, not Indian rupees, but in the new BRICS currency. But Russia can take the BRICS currency and spend it in China, or buy aircraft from Brazil, buy manufactured goods from China, buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Well, they don't need the oil, but other manufactured goods from Turkey, as the case may be. Well, once you expand the membership, now the currency is really useful. So it's not just limited to whatever one country can sell you. It's expanded to what 20 countries can sell you. Guess which monetary union has 20 members?
Right.
The euro. So people who say this can't be done, I'm like, hey,
Exactly.
ever heard of the euro? It can be done very successfully. So the key is not, cooking up some formula, a gold standard exchange. Those are important issues. I'm not dismissing them, but I'm saying the real key is expanding the membership. And that's what they're going to do in October in Russia.
Good point. I'm so happy you said that, Jim, because obviously as a journalist, I need to remain neutral, and I want to invite people with differing voices. But I'm always scratching my head when I have folks so dismissive of the BRICS. Our experts basically using the analogy, well, it's like a group of family members at a table. How in the world are you ever going to get them to agree to a common currency, whatever that looks like? But that's such a good point. Look at the euro. They got there.
Right. Yeah, they did. And again, there's a lot of technical work behind the scenes, but that work is going on. By the way, the BRICS started, I know it's a marketing gimmick by Goldman Sachs in 2000, but as far as a serious political organization, it really started in 2006. And so they've been around for 18 years. And they have the New Development Bank in Shanghai. And by the way, who's the president of the New Development Bank? Dilma Rousseff, who's the former president of Brazil. This thing is very well thought out. They have the contingent reserve arrangement, which is basically their own version of the IMF. So they've duplicated or replicated the Bretton Woods institutions on their own terms, and they're soon going to have their own currency. And it looks like it will have a gold reference. I'm not saying it's a full-blown gold standard, but the value of the unit of currency will be based, I've seen some versions 40% based on weight of gold, not the dollar price of gold on a given day or on a particular day, but weight of gold, which is a different way of thinking about it. So that's coming. And now that doesn't make it a reserve currency. Reserve currency is different than a trading currency, but just the trading currency alone can be very, very successful. And it's not the end of the dollar. It doesn't mean, oh, here's the BRICS currency, that's the end of the dollar. That's not how it works. It's like someone new sits down at the table. It doesn't mean the dollar goes away. It doesn't mean that, but it means that all of a sudden it's competing for its share of world trade and world payments with a new currency that has the backing of maybe upwards of 20 countries, including countries that collectively are, over 50% of global GDP, using purchasing power parity measures. Half the population, more than half the population of the world, more than half the landmass, et cetera. This is not some ragtag group of so-called third world countries. This is more than half the
So
world.
what eventually does bring down the dollar, Jim? Is it debt, which I feel we're not talking enough about? And just to bring up some numbers here, we have 2 trillion in annual deficits and 100
Right.
trillion of baseline deficits projected into 2050. Obviously, we're on an unsustainable trajectory here. So is that, and I know it's a loaded question, and we probably need a whole other hour for it, but the road that leads us to the death of the dollar?
Yeah, it probably is debt. What it really is, Daniela, is
Mm.
confidence, which is a behavioral state. It's a mental state. And this is where I've warned the Treasury, I've warned the Pentagon, I've been, all over Washington on this. And I say, look, here's your problem. You're taking confidence for granted. You're assuming that people always have confidence in the dollar. Therefore, it's a hammer. You can go bang any nail you see. You can use it as a weapon. You can sanction Russia. You can seize the assets of the Russian central bank. You can kick countries out of SWIFT. You can impose secondary sanctions. Secondary sanction is where, you're not the bad guy, but you're trading with the bad guy. So now you're a bad guy too. And I'm going to punish your banks and your payment system and limit the ability of third parties to deal with the second parties who are dealing with the guy I don't like, which is Russia in this case. That I told the Treasury, I said, you're overusing the sanctions. They do work in limited conditions. They don't work in all conditions, and they definitely do not work when you overuse them, because my question to them is, how many times can you hit the punching bag before the punching bag walks out of the room? And that's what the BRICS is all about. The BRICS are like, no mas. Like, we're going to do our own thing. Now, you can't do it overnight. It's taken years already, and it's going to take some years more, but it's well along the way. But I've said the greatest enemy of the dollar is not Russia or China. It's the United States Treasury and the Fed. They take it for granted. They overuse the sanctions. They try to use it as a bludgeon. And all that does, it forces people to walk away from the table. It's like, hey, I've had enough, there's enough sanctions, enough insults. Get me a new currency. So that is the process by which the BRICS currency will gradually, not overnight, but gradually displace the US dollar as a trading currency, but not all at once. But you're asking a deeper question, which is, does there come a time when the dollar loses its status as a reserve currency? You don't even want US treasuries because you don't trust the US Treasury, either because they're seizing assets or they're going to go to hyperinflation. The seizing asset part is happening now. That happened at the G7 summit in Puglia, Italy on June 13th, when they agreed to basically steal the interest on the frozen Russian assets and use it to pay principal and interest on a $50 billion bond issue guaranteed by the United States of America, and they're going to give the money to Ukraine. Like, timeout. So, by the way, who's the lender in that situation? I just said the United States of America, but it's me and a lot of our listeners. We're the ones who pay the taxes to make that all possible. So we're lending the money to Ukraine, which most Americans don't want, by the way. But if you have a $50 billion bond at 5% interest, that's a pretty good estimate of what an interest rate would be if it's backed by the U.S. That's $2.5 million a year in interest. Let's say a 5-year loan. So what's that? 10 is $12.5 billion of interest on $50 billion of principal. So in 5 years, you need $63 billion to pay back the principal and interest on the loan. Where are you going to get $63 billion? Well, the answer is the frozen Russian assets are $300 billion at 5% interest, because assuming they've been rolled over at that level into new treasury notes, that produces $15 billion a year in interest. Again, over the same 5 years, that's $75 billion. So we are stealing $75 billion of Russian interest to pay maybe $62.5 billion on the $50 billion loan. It's still theft. I mean, I don't care what you call it. There's somehow they got this legal opinion that, oh, we're not stealing the bonds, we're just taking the interest. I'm sorry, if I own a bond and it pays interest, I own the interest. So to say that, oh, you're just stealing the interest, you'd have to be as dumb as Janet Yellen to think that works. And so that's what they're doing. But the rest of the world is watching. Saudi Arabia,
Japan.
Taiwan, Japan,
Exactly.
Korea. Everybody's watching. They say, wait a second, if you're stealing U.S. Treasury securities in the form of interest from Russia because you don't like Russia, what if you don't like me someday? What if you decide that I'm not doing something you want? And that's the motivation for getting out of the dollar. So you know the famous Hemingway quote from The Sun Also Rises, where the two buddies are in Spain talking and they're drinking, and one guy said, "How did you go bankrupt?" And the answer was, slowly
Yes.
at first and then suddenly. And that's how confidence is lost in the United States, slowly at first and then suddenly. So we're not at the suddenly stage yet, but we're getting really
Jim,
close.
just one final point here. I know I mentioned at the start we're heading to Rick Rule's fantastic show in Boca. Hopefully, people watching can still make it and come join us. Obviously, focused a lot on gold. And the last time you were on, there was a quote you had, where you broke down how you could see gold going above, whatever it was, the exact number, 27, 28,000, and it
I think
resonated
27,000.
with so
Yeah,
many
that's right.
people. And we see the banks, we see the forecasts. Everyone is quite bullish gold. Why do you think there's still some folks on the sidelines? Because the retail investor has not showed up yet. What do you think's happening on the gold front? Just want to get your take here.
Well, we're now into a third generation of Americans who have not been taught anything about gold. I was fortunate. My years, I went to graduate school in international economics, School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. At the very tail end of Bretton Woods, Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, but the gold standard hung around for a while. They had the Washington agreement, and then it took a while to fully demonetize gold. So that's when I was studying this in 73 and 74. And when we looked at national balance sheets, national, balance of payments statements, gold was a monetary asset. We had to study it. And so I was literally the last group of students who studied gold as a monetary asset. If you know anything about gold today, and you do, and a lot of our listeners do, but if you know anything about gold today, you either went to mining college or you were self-taught. But the schools, the economics departments, you can go to Harvard, they won't teach you anything about gold. You go to Colorado Mining College, you'll learn how to dig it up. But so people who understand gold are self-taught because there is no
100%.
educational system that teaches it. But that's a relatively small group. People don't have time for that. And so when you stop talking about it, when you deny it exists, what I ask is, and I talked to Ben Bernanke about this. If gold is not a monetary asset, why does the United States have 8,000 tons, 8,000 metric tons? Like, why don't you just have an auction and get the money, And they don't have a good answer for that. Well, the answer is that it still has a monetary role. They just don't want to talk about it. Now, take what I just said and combine it with my discussion about confidence in the dollar. I'm not saying we're going back to a gold standard right away, but here's where the $27,000 comes from. It's not a forecast in the sense of, sit tight, it'll hit $27,000. It's an answer to a question. If you had to restore confidence in the dollar, and if you had to go to a gold standard to do that, which we might, what would the price of gold have to be to make that work? And it's not complicated. I took M1. M1 is a pretty good definition of the money supply. It's broader than M0, but not as broad as M2. Take M1, ask yourself, how much backing do I need to support the dollar? You don't need 100%. The Austrians bang the table and yell 100%. Historically, somewhere between 20 and 40% is enough to maintain confidence. How much gold do we have? 8,133 tons. So with those inputs, you say, okay, if I have 8,000 or so tons, metric tons, and I need to support an M2 money supply, M1 money supply of X with 40% gold, what would the price per ounce have to be in order to make that work? And the answer is $27,000. It's just, by the way, it keeps going up. I said the same thing 6-7 years ago, and I said $10,000. I said, Jim, did you change your mind? I said, like, no, they expanded the money supply. In other words, if you change one of the inputs, you're going to get a different answer. So the reason the answer is a lot higher today is because the money supply is a lot higher. But take the money supply, take 40% of that, take 8,000 tons, divide the gold by the dollars, and the price per ounce is about $27,000. If you come up with a lower price, I mean, well, you won't. I mean, that's the math. That's 8th grade math. But or my day was 6th grade math, but whatever. If you pick a lower price, you say, well, that's too high. We think it should be $5,000 an ounce. You can do it, but that is highly, highly deflationary. You would have to shrink the money supply to make that work, and it would be a new Great Depression. And that is a mistake that Churchill made in 1925. So to avoid the deflationary blunder, get it right, make it work. If you had to do it to restore confidence, the answer is $27,000 an ounce. So that's why I look at the confidence side of the equation. I was like, how are we doing there? And the answer is horribly. The U.S. is the greatest threat to the U.S. dollar.
And when you were speaking about Bernanke and how they never have a good answer as why they own gold, you know, that clip of Ron Paul challenging him just lives rent free in my head. It resurfaced on my feed the other day. Anyhow, Jim, I can't wait to see you at Rick Rule's show. It's been too long that I've been in the same room with you, so I can't wait to give you a big hug and chat with you there in person.
Good, looking forward to it. It'd be a great crowd, and Rick puts on a good show, and it's one of the larger conferences. So just the networking that comes out of it.
Good fun. Yeah, I'm gonna go pack my bags after this interview. Jim Rickards, everyone. Always love speaking with you, and thank you all for watching. We'll have more great content coming your way, so be sure to stay tuned to the Daniela Cambone Show and watch for our content and more interviews from Rick Rule's show in Boca Raton. See you soon.